Welcome everybody to the Virtual Project Management Roundtable panel. I'm Fred Obiero. I'm a Managing Director of Client Solutions and Training here at Pro Society, and I will also be the host and moderator for today's webinar. I want to thank each one of you guys for registering for this event and for being with us here today, and also like to thank the Pro Society team for all the work that they put in to make this thing available. So thanks all for that. We'll have some time set aside for Q&A towards the end of this discussion. For those of you who just joined, I was talking about this, I think, a few minutes before 3 o'clock, that we'll have the Q&A set aside for the last probably 15 to 10 minutes before we wind down so that everybody can have at least an opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. So please use the question, it's a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. I don't know if you can see that, but please use that to submit your questions, and then towards the end, I'll be able to select from those. As far as today, we'll be talking to Melissa Algarin. She's the EPMO Director at Memorial Healthcare. And then we'll also be speaking with Kathy Ericsson. Kathy brings with her over 22 years of establishing and optimizing PMOs. So Kathy, we're really happy to have you, and same goes for you, Melissa. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate both of you being with us here today. So with that, I'll just get us started. So Melissa, the first question is going to be for you. With project teams working remotely now, what's been the biggest adjustment that you've had to make with regards to how your projects are being ran at your company?
So I think everybody is finding that they're being tested at this time. I think now, not just working remotely, but also with all of the challenges with COVID, one of the biggest obstacles and adjustments that we specifically have had to make at Memorial in our PMO is really taking a good look at our methodologies. Traditionally, we've been very much a top-down waterfall shop, and I think the nature of our portfolio, we work on things like new service lines, innovative ways to bring in revenue, etc. Those kinds of projects, I think, lend themselves well to more longer, more well thought out planning and initiation sessions. So we have more of the luxury pre-COVID to do those things and really get in a room with our stakeholders and spend some time creating this plan from the top down. What we're finding now is, like I said, we're being tested, and it's time for us to essentially flex our agile muscles, and that's what we find ourselves doing. Something that we've recently encountered is a lot of our projects have been put on hold to focus on COVID-specific projects. So we're working side by side with our operational stakeholders, creating mini projects to see things moving forward, to really work on the impact and help our organization through what COVID has really brought to us. And for example, we at Memorial have instituted some financial task forces aimed at looking at things like cost containment, revenue enhancement, policies and procedures related to COVID. And we found that getting into these meetings remotely, not even in person any longer, and taking the luxury of 2 to 4 hours to really do a charter and create a top-down approach is not going to serve our organization well. We have to really implement these sprints and become more agile, for lack of a better term. And what we're doing is we've created multiple work streams focused on those financial aspects like cost containment, like I mentioned, and we're creating 7 to 14-day sprints. So we're focused on a couple of things to really take a look at the cost accounting and what it's done to our system, and test and try a few things. It's all about monitoring and execution, and then coming back and readjusting as needed. I've really talked to my team, and we've thought, well, you know, it's a different pace. It's a different pace from what we're used to. And I think if we all, as project managers, take some time to be those sensors, which is an agile term a lot of you might be familiar with, putting those feelers out there with our stakeholders and understanding where things are while we're in the sprint, I think we're going to be in a much better place. And obviously, being that we're virtual, all of that needs to be done electronically via video meetings if you can. I highly recommend that, seeing faces when you can. But it's definitely been an adjustment for our organization. And, you know, lastly, one of the things I'd want to say is I feel like this test that I keep alluding to has been long coming. And one of the things that I really thought a lot about when I came back to Memorial in 2018 and reestablished the Enterprise Project Management Office is, you know, these offices have been evolving to be less rigid and standard based and more about nimbleness. And to that end, one of the pieces that I built into our value proposition for our department is a statement that reads, we will employ project management practices for the betterment of the system that are standardized yet nimble. So I think nimble is the word of the game right now, and we have to be ready to just kind of jump and move. And we didn't necessarily have time to prepare. Here we are, but I think employing those agile practices are really going to set us up for success.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Melissa. I honestly cannot think of many industries that have had to have the biggest adjustment as the healthcare industry has had to do. And you talk about going from waterfall methodology to now adapting agile. That's as big of an adjustment as it gets, you know, with regards to everything else that's also going on in our world today. So thanks for that, Melissa. That's really helpful. Kathy, so this next question is for you. Having formerly served as the president of the South Florida chapter of the PMI, what is your assessment of the future of traditional project management given the latest push for virtual project management? Kathy, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
I had a tickle in my throat earlier because of my allergies, so I didn't want to disturb anybody. Traditional project management, at least with my experience, has really evolved a lot, especially in the last 10 years. My experience has been that both project managers and project teams slowly have been becoming more remote as they've taken on products on a global basis. Some of those teams have had to be remote. Some of those project managers have had to be remote. And now I think that we're in a good position to help many other people who find themselves in this situation all of a sudden where they need to become remote as well. And so I think that from, you know, traditional project management and then, you know, given the recent events with COVID-19, I think the future of project management is going to continue to evolve. I think that project managers are going to be put in a position where they're just going to have to be more flexible with project teams. Recently, my teams, because of the stay-at-home recommendations, I had team members who we would meet during a project team meeting or a staff meeting, and they would have a child on their lap. And that was perfectly acceptable because we need to understand that as, you know, we continue to deliver our projects, that we also are working in homes where family members are also under a stay-at-home recommendation. So I think that project management, especially with PMI, I've been seeing it evolve with all of the new methodologies, the agile methodologies, the, you know, traditional waterfall. IIBA has really taken on a very similar approach to it. So I think that we're going to continue to evolve. We're going to continue to see new methodologies come out. I've seen some companies where they've gone from traditional waterfall and they've swung completely the other way to agile, only to have that pendulum kind of come back and stay in the middle somewhere. So I think we're going to continue to see not just a specific methodology for a company. I think that as PMI evolves and project management evolves, we're going to see one company having multiple methodologies. So I think that's what the future is going to look like. And fortunately, today we have the tools to help us be successful.
It's funny you should say that, because that just ties back to what Melissa just alluded to, where they were a full waterfall shop, and then given the advent of coronavirus, they had to adapt pretty quickly. and move to agile while everybody's working remote. So that's an example right there that I think everybody can point to, not just with Melissa's company, Memorial, but a lot of people that are working in a project management office setting. So that's a good insight. Melissa, speaking of remote teams, so what are some of the drawbacks that come with leading project teams remotely, and how have you been able to overcome them in order to ensure successful project delivery?
You know, this is something that during my team meetings on a weekly, sometimes even daily basis with my own specific project management team, we toss around different ideas, and something that we all came to as a team really was not something that was just dictated down from me as their director, but we all came to is there's something in our world, at least what we do at Memorial, there's something certainly lacking when you're just not in the same room having especially those upfront project planning meetings where it's important to read facial expressions, body language. Project managers, effective project managers, have the ability in those cases in person to really steer the agenda, steer the course of the conversation effectively, depending on how your stakeholders are reacting to the content matter. And without that, what we've discussed as a team is you really have to find ways to compensate. And something that we're doing, that we started doing almost right away once we turned virtual, is asking probably more clarifying questions in these meetings of our stakeholders than we would if we were in person, almost in an exaggerated way. And something that I actually just recently employed only over the last week is for certain meetings where the stakeholders, some might be a little bit more long-winded or they tend to get off track. I actually made it a point to add 15 minutes to the meeting to ensure that two things happen. We have the ability to ask clarifying questions, understanding where your sponsors, your stakeholders are really not just practically with the project, but mentally and emotionally, because this is a tough time. So being able to ask those questions, and two, ensuring at the end of your meeting, you as the project manager have time to really recap any key points, key decisions, or action items. I think these are probably best practices anyway, whether you're in person or virtual, but I do feel that this is even more important and we should put at the forefront of our facilitation style and how we hold meetings now that we're virtual. I think we have the benefit of Zoom meetings where we can see each other, but really just being in a room, I just don't think anything really can better that. Understanding that a lot of PMOs are already set up virtually and maybe they've been doing this for a while, but for those of us who haven't, i.e. us at Memorial, we really do value those in-person meetings. We're just really trying to adjust. And I think meeting your stakeholder where they're at, asking those questions so that we're meeting their expectations is going to help us, and bring in dividends in the long run. Right.
Thanks for that, Melissa. And Kathy, before we move on to the next question, I'm curious to know what kind of feedback do you have having led teams that were remote? Were there any challenges that were common, separate to what Melissa has already gone over that you experienced, and was there any measures that you took to overcome those?
So historically, when I've worked with project managers that have had remote teams, they had a certain cadence and they had a certain tempo that they were able to get set up and kind of maintain with their project teams. I think that what has happened recently since, the stay at home, a lot of people outside of the project manager role, like the business analysts and the technical leads and those team members, found themselves in a remote situation that they necessarily weren't comfortable with. So, Melissa mentioned earlier about the video calls. I can't stress enough how important that is, that you get comfortable during video calls and know that people will pay attention more and be less likely to multitask if you encourage the video calling. So a lot of my teams, and collectively as a team, my PMs that reported into me, they weren't used to meeting with me virtually and each other in a virtual way because we were always in the office with each other. So I think that, you know, that's where the sensitivity comes in as managers and leaders. We really need to be sensitive to the fact that we're not the only ones working remote. And just because our environment may be conducive to, for us to be able to do that, not everybody's environment is the same. So a lot of patience and understanding and empathy is important right now. And especially now that our teams are virtual, but we can make it happen. I mean, we'll continue to produce and we'll continue to, you know, hone our skills and get better at what we do, even if we have to do it virtually for now. It won't be that way forever.
Right, right. It's actually fine that you should say that you require the PM to report it to you to at least dial into the meetings, the online meetings with their webcam on, just to make sure that they're not multitasking while, you know, participating in the meeting. I think that's something valuable, and a lot of companies are starting to use that more and more. And I think an example of that is how Zoom has exploded in popularity, not just with businesses, but with people during the lockdown. So that's a good example there, Kathy.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that people, you know, are distracted when the video's not on. It's just that they're less inclined to
Right.
be able to try and multitask. And I was guilty of it myself when I was working remote. I would be trying to type, you know, one screen over here on my right, trying to type a response or get some minutes ready to go out the door while I'm also trying to listen in on a conference call. But now that, you know, we're doing more video, and I recommend it. I never insist on it because people's bandwidth may be different, or, you know, their laptops may be different, or everybody has a bad hair day. If I was having a bad hair day, I'd show up late for work maybe to rectify that. So, you know, people will have bad hair days, but I do encourage it. I think it's better for everybody. And I think because we don't have that physical connection anymore, I think that the video connection is something that we should encourage.
That's great. All right. Kathy, some of our viewers may be currently on the job market for project management roles, or at least know someone that is on the job market for the same roles. What are some of the tips that you would like to share for individuals looking to sharpen their interviewing skills when applying to roles within a PMO?
So this is interesting. I'm one of those people now that you mention it. So one of the things that I really want to call out is that all interviews right now, actually, at least the ones that I've been involved with, and I hope everybody's, are being done remote. So they're being done over the phone, or they're being done in video cameras. So with Zoom, with Hangouts, with Skype, with a lot of these tools that these companies are going to use to interview the candidates, you can actually go online ahead of time and turn your video on and see how you look and see how you're projecting, and make sure that you've got a background that's not, you know, confusing or distracting to someone who you would be interviewing you. And you have to picture yourself in the office, and you have to act accordingly in the office interviewing with that person. Your hand gestures, your voice, your communication, and it's not that easy when you don't have someone right in front of you and you can see all of those gestures. So you need to get comfortable with it. Practice with friends, practice with family, record yourself, ask yourself some interview questions and respond and listen to that. I think that's what I do, and hopefully it's going to work. And that's what I would recommend for interviewing tips. Have your resume memorized. If you're going to be reading from it in front of you, you're going to look like this, and you're not going to be looking at the interviewer. Okay. So memorize your resume, know it. I mean, it should be a representative of who you are anyway, so you shouldn't have to refer to it. But the interviewer will have it up on their screen in front of them, or be referring to different points on it. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention, you are engaged in that interview process, and that you can speak well to your own resume.
There you go. For those of you that may or may not be interviewed with Kathy in the future, you know the tips on how to crack a code for interviewing.
There we go.
Right. All right, Melissa, you work for a healthcare organization, and I'm sure there's a lot of work for the teams that you manage, as you've alluded to earlier. What do you normally look for in candidates that you interview to determine, number one, if they'll be a good fit for your teams, and number two, if they are really good at what they do?
So I think those two pieces you mentioned, good fit and good at what they do, are not necessarily, in my opinion, weighed equally anymore. I think as PMOs and project managers and just the whole industry has evolved, in what I personally look for more is more of the fit and the soft skills side. I think the technical project management side just gets you through the door, frankly, and I think it's important, that can be learned and enhanced. But I do think it's a little bit harder to learn certain soft skills. It can be done. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's just something that you really want to showcase in your interview, and something that I specifically look for in a candidate. And so, for example, some of the things I think of, you know, something like passion. I don't think that can be overstated. Passion for the work, passion for the people. I think an effective project manager is going to get down there in the front lines, work with these teams, don't shy away from collaboration. I think if you can ask some behavioral or situation-based questions that get them to show that spark, that the passion is there, I think that's something I definitely look for, and I always try to fold in a question in that regard. The second one, I would tell you, I probably 5 years ago, maybe a little longer, I wouldn't have looked for this, but today I do. And I think this is an interesting trait. Political savviness. I think when you work with, in a complex organization, you know, a PMO, that you're leading without authority. And I think that might resonate with people. You don't necessarily have that direct line, or rather your stakeholders don't have that direct line to you. You want someone who is able to build those relationships, navigate the waters of the organization, you know, in the right way, try to get a seat at the table for those meetings. And I think it does take a level of political savviness, and asking those scenario-based questions here around, you know, how would you make a case for sitting in on this meeting where certain project deliverables are going to be discussed, where maybe you weren't initially thought of as someone with a seat at the table? How can you make a case for that? And, you know, things like that. I think that savviness is a real attribute that I look for. And then cultural fit, again, cannot be overstated. I think one thing I have to say about my own organization is we really pride ourselves on having developed a very, very healthy culture. It's something that I take seriously, and I look to protect it, so that Wayne, if that individual would really fit culturally with this kind of collaborative, even small town community type feel in such a large organization, is something I'm looking for. And departmentally, specifically, our PMO, we've come a long way. We've really developed a culture that I think if you were to ask the project managers, they would tell you that they're happy, they feel autonomous, they feel that they have a seat at the table, their voice is being heard. So I want someone who is going to jump in and just fit right in to that team, and really be that team player. And then, believe it or not, lastly, I'm going to look for that technical project management. I think everything else takes precedence. I think certainly you want someone who's done this before, who has the skills and maybe one or two methodologies. You know, a PMP doesn't hurt. I think it's good to get certified if you haven't already, if this is what you're looking to do. But those soft skills is something that is what's going to, after getting you through the door, just kind of get you into the department. So those are the things that I would really look for in a candidate, and I'd urge you guys to think about, especially if you know, like Kathy said, if you're preparing, if you're doing some role playing for the interview with your spouse, or recording yourself and watching, think about some of those scenario based things. So think about very specific examples where you show these soft skill attributes. The more specific your example, the better. I think if you can show that you did it in practice versus just kind of shouting out the term, oh, I'm passionate, but why are you passionate? You know, expand on that. So just something to consider.
Thanks, Melissa. And I have a small follow-up before we move on to the next question. You talked about how soft skills is a big part of what you look for in interviewers. From a hiring manager's perspective, do you think that that's something that's easily detectable across an electronic platform like through Zoom or WebEx or Skype?
I mean, I think that's a really fair question. I think that it's less detectable over the phone. I think passion you sometimes see in people's eyes, and I think you're going to get the the best the best estimate for where they fall if you're doing a Zoom meeting like this, and you can look at someone in the eyes and kind of see how they answer the question. You know, I would say for an interview, it's the second best alternative to just in person. I certainly think that I personally wouldn't proceed by just a phone call. I think being able to see someone face to face is important. The phone call certainly is the icebreaker, and then you kind of go from there.
Great. Well, I'm sure we have a lot of listeners that are in the job market, so you know, you just give everybody the tips, and we should have a few project managers working at the memorial.
Yeah.
All right, Kathy, next question's for you. According to a PMI survey from 2017, almost 1/3 of all project failures were due to poor communication. Based on your expertise, what are some of the recommendations that you would make for project managers to promote effective communication across projects?
Excellent question, actually. This is one of my favorites so far. So I have a saying, communication is the root of all evil, or lack thereof, or ineffective communication. So I agree with the survey results, actually. And the most important recommendation I have is to become familiar with organizational change management. You can call it ProSci, you can call it organizational readiness, you can call it change management, not to be confused with technical change management like deploying code. Change management as far as who are your project stakeholders, doing a stakeholder analysis, understanding each stakeholder's needs, communications, and what's in it for me, and come up with a project communication strategy that you can be nimble with. I love that. As you're learning more about your stakeholder audiences, but there are tools that ProSci and some of these other certification for organizational change have available to really help project teams understand not just the immediate team, but the stakeholders who you may not even realize until you go through those exercises that you have this entire whole group of stakeholders way over here that are going to be impacted downstream. And if you didn't go through these exercises, you may not have identified those. So especially today, look at your communication venues. You've got video, you've got email, you've got instant messaging, you've got texts. One of my most recent initiatives that I was working on, my stakeholder, my project sponsor, she loved to text. That's what she did. She was a single mom with a couple of kids. This was a massive project. It exceeded $10 million. It had been derailed previously. So I was kind of brought in to get it back on the rails and get it delivered. And one of her frustrations when I had met with her is that she said that the PM would never respond to her texts and would always follow up with an email. And if she wanted an email, she would have started with an email. So you need to listen, you need to understand what are the communication needs of each and every stakeholder. And, you know, if they're a team member and if they're a stakeholder, one's not important than the other. They each have their own needs. It's your job to understand what they are and to figure out how they are going to receive the communication. So look at organizational change management best practices, start adopting them, get certified, if you will, take some classes. There's a lot of universities that are giving free classes right now. So, you know, for those of you who are looking for a job, add that to your carpet bag as well.
Thanks for that, Kathy. Melissa, I wanted to talk about something else that that came to my mind with regards to remote teams. how do you ensure that teams are staying in touch with more stakeholders? And how do you make them feel engaged in the process? Because we've talked about how people within the project team, stay in touch, but what about the stakeholders?
Yeah, I think this is a perfect follow-up question because it really builds on what Kathy was just explaining. I think first and foremost, we need to, especially now in the time we're living in, we need to have some honest conversations and almost just say, hold on, stakeholder, before we proceed, I need to meet you where you are. And it's something as simple as like what Kathy said. One is, let's just make sure that given the times we're living in, is this still your priority? Is this still an organizational priority? Some of those conversations are happening. Some of those conversations are happening now at Memorial, where some projects just, while they were top priority 3 months ago, they're not any longer. So staying engaged with your stakeholder and meeting them where they're at, first making sure it's a priority. If you do align on the fact that, okay, it's still a priority, let's move forward. What works for you, stakeholder? How would you like best to communicate on project status, on any barriers, roadblocks, etc.? Do you want a text message? I have, same thing, Kathy, we have stakeholders that prefer it. Do you want a Zoom meeting so we can see each other and kind of have some dialogue? Would you prefer an email? And it's not one size fits all. It's very much stakeholder specific. And what I realized too is the stakeholder that was okay with the one email a week pre-COVID now is not okay with that any longer. They want the daily text now. I mean, let's face it, we are under heightened stress. And I think taking a step at looking at your project portfolio, understanding from your stakeholder, your sponsors, your organization, okay, which projects are still left standing right now? Which are our priorities? And then understanding how can I best communicate with you and help drive this? It's funny because it kind of leads me back, now that I'm thinking about the first question where we have to be nimble. It's this concept of social innovation, where we are trying to meet our stakeholder where they are and need to be ready to flex. And that's something that it's taken some time to get here over the years. I think we used to be a little bit more rigid as PMOs, but we have to be ready to do that. And I'm very, very much with Kathy here that it's stakeholder specific and it's environment specific. So there's a pre-COVID and there's an in COVID and hopefully a post-COVID. So yeah, I think let's just meet our stakeholders where they're at.
Thanks. And Kathy, as a follow-up, what measures have you taken in the past to reduce the business impact from poor communication in a team environment?
So it's really basically what Melissa and I have just been saying. It's you need to understand at any given day, any given moment, what communications are working and which ones aren't, and you need to be able to adjust and adapt your communication strategy based on the feedback. And if you don't have some sort of measurement in place to obtain feedback on how effective your communications are, then you should put something in place. I find that I tend to time an email and I tend to time a text, and I will send an email to a stakeholder on topic A and then I'll text on topic B, and 9 out of 10 times I'll never hear back from the email, but I'll hear immediately from the text. So come up with some sort of tests. Let your stakeholder know that you're trying to find the best way to communicate, especially during COVID-19, and really adapt. I think that the most flexible people in the world are project managers. And I've seen that time and time again, where something changes or a risk gets triggered and, they're able to execute that risk mitigation plan or that risk response plan. So, COVID-19 happened today. It's the communication strategies. We need to get a little bit more creative, but especially when it comes to the business. I mean, the business sometimes, especially if you lead IT projects, they feel alienated. So the communication to your business stakeholders probably needs to be something more enhanced than it would your typical project team. And again, that's where the ProSci certification and the organizational change management learnings really come into play is it really allows you the tools and a process to follow to help you understand that and really add that skill set to your corporate bag so that you can be a better communicator.
That's great. That's good. Melissa, we've all seen how COVID-19 has affected lots of businesses and projects for one reason or the other. Could be because of financial reasons or other things. How do you set up your teams to prepare for any anticipated project disruption due to something like, let's say, workforce disruption?
Yeah, I mean, this question is very much hitting home. I think we're all encountering this. And, you know, I think of this from a needs perspective, and at a minimum, or at least to start, you want to make sure that from an infrastructure standpoint, your teams are set up, right? So that they have what they need to function well remotely if they hadn't in the past. That was a whole to-do, frankly, but, you know, we got to a good place. So once you have that kind of basic needs set, I very much, what Kathy said about this change methodology, ProSci, which is something we implement at Memorial, really resonated with me because everybody has a different ability to adjust and react to change. And I think understanding where we as project leaders are at and our teams are at is critical. And then I think that aside for a moment, I think being able to be set up in a way to react to these workforce fluctuations, your resources that were once on your project are now being pulled to handle some frontline pressing COVID matters, or unfortunately, maybe your employees are no longer, there, whatever the case may be. I think this is a good time to go back to basics. And the reason I say that is I want to be able to sit here and say, well, here's number one fancy way that you can do this. Here's number two fancy new innovative way. I think that that's important. I think we should always be innovative, but this is a time where if you think about our triple constraint, quadruple constraint, whichever model you're using, and you think, okay, if my resources are being pulled in this direction, I need to think about my timing. I need to think about my scope. Have that conversation with your stakeholder and understand, is that scope hard set? Is that something that we can pull back on? The answer may be yes, the answer may be no, but if the answer is no, and that scope is hard set, you're now having a real conversation about timing because your triangle is disproportionate at that time. And the reality is you need to address one of those components to get the quality and the success of that project. And I think I know this might sound silly, but something I've done, and it's actually sitting here in my home office, is print your triple constraint, your quadruple constraint. Print it, just put it up on your home office. And when you're having that stressful day, you're trying to think, okay, what's my next step here? How do I deal with this? My resources have been pulled. I've hit this barrier in my project. Just remember and tell yourself, go back to basics, go back to basics. I think at a time like this, it's just something that's helpful to remember. And I think sometimes we can find the answer there.
Great. All right. Kathy, project managers undertake risk management planning. I think you mentioned something to do with risk management early on in the forum, so that they can minimize the possibility of project failure. But for something like COVID-19, I think we can all agree that it snuck up on everyone. Just for an example, how do you adequately plan for the unknown unknowns?
Okay, you're not going to like my answer. I'm not sure anybody would like my answer, but I'm going to say you do not plan for the unknown unknowns adequately anyway. But Melissa brought up a good point earlier, and I actually talk about COVID-19 and the world. The best of the world leaders could not adequately prepare for something like this. So to put that pressure on ourselves, and how do we adequately prepare for project risks? I'm going to say go back to the basics, stick with the basics. I think that, some of the most intriguing projects in the world, including the NASA program that was run by Dr. Brown, and, those programs had significant risks. They were identified, they were known, there were mitigation plans put in place, there were response plans put in place. I think that project management and the PMBOK, both now that it's becoming more agile, it's never going to lose its foundation. I think that those basics are always going to be there. And for us as project leaders, not to encourage our teams to go through formal risk identification, quantification, and management, and not to have a visible, proactive risk management plan is a mistake. And it's a failure to fulfill your responsibility in the role of a project manager if you do not have your risk management plan. So adequately prepare for things like COVID-19. I just don't think that any of us could have done that. But stick with the basics. I mean, look what you can control, look what you can mitigate. Now that we're in this, there are things that, you know, we have control over, and there are things that we just do not have control over. So I ask myself, you know, what do I have control over today that I can have an impact on someone else, on myself? What can I do that allows me to contribute and not focus on these things that I don't have control over? So that's where risk management stands. Stick with the basics, have your risk management plan, and make it known, make it visible, and work it.
Okay, good. Melissa, you, just like most of us, have teams that are now, you know, either mostly or fully working remotely, sitting in front of their computers all day long.
Sure.
Do you have any creative team building exercises that you have developed to increase collaboration and motivation during these tough times?
Yeah, you know, again, this is not something that we've been able to prepare for. So we've been kind of thrown into this situation, and really on a daily basis, that's something that's top of mind for me as a leader. I find that my primary stakeholder is my team. I think without my team feeling motivated, engaged, feeling like they have a piece of this right now in these times, I don't think will make for motivated or engaged stakeholders. I think a happy project manager will make for a happy stakeholder. And so keeping that in mind, you know, some of the things that we've done, and again, this is just off the cuff, we haven't had time to plan for it, is certainly we've upped our meetings. So to compensate for not seeing each other in person and being able to just kind of go to someone's desk and bounce ideas off each other, we have a formal meeting once a week, but I probably talk to each of my project managers on a daily basis. And one thing that over the years, but certainly now I make it a point to do, is don't just jump right into business. I think it means a lot to just say, you know, how's your day going? How are you feeling? And coming from a place that's genuine. I think I want my project managers to feel engaged, but they need to feel like I'm a safe place and a sounding board. And if I'm not that to them, then I don't think they're going to have that level of engagement. So I think now more than ever, it's a good time to check in with your people on a personal level. Let them lead, because, you know, everybody wants to divulge as much as they want to divulge. Some people, you know, want to keep it a little bit closer, and that's completely their prerogative. But taking some time from the front end of your meeting to have those conversations and hear how their day is going is critical, I think, to the success of your department. Secondly, just some fun things. We actually took some time to each of us put together small leadership personal bios and present them to each other. And so we're still in the process of doing that. And it's actually been pretty fun because, you know, you might know something about each other, but you learn a little bit more about someone's background. Oh, I didn't know that about you. I didn't know you came from Long Island, or whatever the case may be, which is my case. And so it gives everybody an opportunity to shine and just say, hey, here's where I come from, here from a personal perspective, but also professional. So we're in the midst of that, our department, and each of us is sharing a little tidbit. Something else fun that we've done, you know, in solidarity with the high school seniors that have, you know, are not going to have those graduations. We each, formal graduations, we each shared our high school picture, which made for a lot of laughs, kind of reminiscing and seeing some of those pictures. So that kind of, you know, lightened the mood a little bit in terms of the stress we're all feeling today. And finally, this is actually a popular one that I'm hopefully looking to do soon with my team if they're open to it. So maybe they're hearing this for the first time if any of them are watching, but I'd love to do a virtual happy hour. That's become a thing. And if your team's up for it, just, you know, after hours, have a few laughs over a glass of wine. It's a good way to really reset. I'm really big on laughing and just kind of finding a way to get through the day. Some days are harder now than others, especially now with everything we're encountering. So I'm a big proponent of that. So if you can do that virtual happy hour, I definitely recommend it.
Thanks for that, Melissa. And Kathy, I'm going to have one more question for you, and then we'll jump to the Q&A because we run out of time. So Kathy, companies now, we talked about how a lot of companies are being forced to have their resources working remotely. I think just 2 weeks ago, Twitter just announced that they'll have all their employees work remote, you know, for perpetuity. And just yesterday, I think Google also announced something similar to that towards at least the end of the year. What advice would you give to the listeners so that they can make the most of working in a decentralized project environment?
Sure. So I'm going to assume that there's different groups of listeners on this call. To the group of listeners that are leaders, I am asking you to lead. I am asking you to lead with empathy. As Melissa was just talking about, understand that behind that screen, behind that camera, the person that is on your team that you are working with has things that are beyond their control, be it financially, be it the children have no place, no daycare, they have no school, their spouse is home working from home, whatever it is, lead with empathy and understand that, you know, this is not a time to micromanage. There never is a time really to micromanage, but this is certainly not the time to do that. I think that that's very important. I also think it's important, as I mentioned earlier, and Melissa has talked about this, encourage those video calls. Start your team meetings off with, let's go around the table. And I did this with my team for 6 or 8 weeks, you know, at Magically when we were all working from home. We would get on our call twice a week at the beginning of the week and towards the end of the week. And we would spend the first couple of minutes going person by person. You know, how are you doing today? Is there anything that any team member can help with? One of the women who was a single mom, couldn't go to the store because she had her little babies and she couldn't take the babies. So she was relying on Instacart. But unbeknownst to me, Florida was having a problem with eggs. So one of our peers on the call, one of her peers said, I know where there's eggs, I can get some and I'll drop them off on your doorstep. And she did. And even though we're not together and we're all not working as a team anymore, we still meet every week, every Tuesday at 10 a.m. And we still say, you know, how's your resume writing going? How's your job search going? Do you need anything? So I'm asking the people on this call to lead with empathy and be understanding. Take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of others. Decentralize, you know, this is it. This is what we're doing, folks. I think that the whole world is getting creative. And I mean, the whole world is getting creative. I love the happy hour idea. So I think that should, I think it's catching on actually. So I would encourage more of that. But now more than ever, I think we need to bring our personal selves into the work environment and don't be flawless. Don't pretend you are and don't act it, because if you show your flaws, others will as well.
That's a good one.
You can help them.
That's a good one. All right. I'll have one question for you, Kathy, for the Q&A. Somebody asked, what projects benefit from a virtual and remote format? Are software projects versus infrastructure projects more adaptable to using the remote model? What's your thought on that?
So, you know, it's funny that this question came up. My PMO at Magic Leap, we had both infrastructure projects and we had obviously technology projects. And my infrastructure, 2 members of the infrastructure project team turned around and worked remote just like the rest of us. They were able to, you know, work with their vendors, have video conferences with their vendors. They were one of the infrastructure things that we felt, and it's funny that I'm talking about this because it came up earlier in the risk question, is that companies were not allowing infrastructure vendors to go on site to do work initially. So the offices were shut down, and any maintenance being done to those offices or new locations, you know, all of a sudden we had to go through this whole new process to get clearance to get these vendors to be able to go on site. And in some cases we were not able to do that. I don't think that would have, I think that would have happened whether it was virtual or not. I don't think that there's a hard delineation between infrastructure and software projects. I think that good project management is good project management. And I think I made a mistake. I think someone may have misheard. I said, don't act flawless. Show people your flaws. None of us are flawless. So I can't say that enough. Don't pretend that, you know, you're perfect, and don't pretend that you don't make mistakes. I have certainly made my mistakes, and if anybody asks me, I'm happy to share them. Most people learn from them. I know I do. So
Okay.
that's what I meant. Sorry if it didn't come off that way.
No, that's good. I think thanks for the clarification for those. I think somebody had posted that on the chat feature. Melissa, this one's for you. So as we all know, PMOs normally define and maintain standards for project management within an organization. How big of a value add is this? And what are some of the biggest benefits that can come out of having PMOs run all company projects?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. You know, I think one of the big things that PMOs provide is consistency and standards and organization in a world of chaos. And I think that in my experience, consistency tends to breed clarity. And I don't know about you, but clarity is big for me. I want to know what's expected of me as a project leader, as a project manager. I think if I know what's expected, I'm more likely to deliver exactly what is expected. So I think PMOs, that structure certainly helps. What's interesting though is I feel the value that PMOs add has really, really changed. And not just with COVID. I'm not talking with COVID. I'm talking with just this evolution of, again, the soft skills that I talked about earlier. I think now, what was it? I read from the Pulse of the Profession. I don't know if anybody read the recent one that PMI released. They talked about the empathy of the voice of the stakeholder. And so it's this notion, and this has really kind of had my wheels turning, where I thought, okay, so empathy in that we're maybe not just sitting with our stakeholder and explaining, okay, this is the process we'll follow to get from planning to, you know, monitoring to executing, but maybe we're sitting with our stakeholder now and hearing what they have to say and hearing their input on what's going to make this process work. So it's this whole notion of empathy for our stakeholders. I think Kathy said it perfectly, empathy for ourselves and our own team members and what they're going through. But this notion of empathy is pretty high up there in terms of important skills that a project manager and PMOs need today. So I think that it's again, we're not flawless, like Kathy said, but trying our best, the journey to get to the balance of the consistency in practice, but also the consistency in delivering a good customer experience and empathy in every interaction is something that's new. It's more complex. It's PMOs, project managers' roles, they're more complex, but honestly, I think it makes it more exciting. I think what we do is it's a whole bag of attributes and skills and value add. And I think if we can keep trying our best and failing along the way, we have to let ourselves fall, failing along the way, but getting to a point where we're always providing that empathy to our stakeholders, our team members, but also providing that consistency and being able to say what PMI is saying here and kind of give that standards, I think is a nice balance we should strive for.
Great. All right, looks like we're running out of time. I think we only have I'm in the left. So I just want to thank you, Kathy and Melissa. It's been great having you guys on today. And I also want to thank all the participants and all the ones that are sending their questions for us. And also thanks for being here with us. We have our next webinar coming up on the 28th of this month. So feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to register for all the webinars that we have coming up. Other than that, it's been great having you guys here today, and I look forward to future webinars so we can learn more from our panelists. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Fred.
you,
Thanks,
Fred.
everyone.
We appreciate it. Bye, Melissa. It was great working with you.
Same with you, Kathy. You take care.
Hey, thanks.
And you as well.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
All right, bye.